She winked and whispered,
what do you
"Are you
think?"
sure you're old enough for this?" But the moment our eyes met, I knew
I
this
think
was
you're
just
gonna
the
be
beginning of
surprised.
something impossible to resist. It was a warm, late afternoon when I first saw her. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden streaks across the neighborhood as I sat on my porch, nursing a cold drink. I had just moved into the area, still getting used to the quiet rhythm of suburban life, far from the city's hustle. I hadn't expected much excitement here, just the usual, a new home, a new routine, and plenty of time to reflect. I'd only just begun settling in when she walked by. Her presence was unmistakable, even from a distance. She was tall, with a graceful posture that made her seem both confident and at ease with herself. Her dark hair was tied loosely at the back, strands falling softly around her face as she moved. I couldn't help but notice how effortlessly beautiful she looked, dressed in a simple but elegant sundress that swayed with every step, and a light cardigan that draped over her shoulders just so. She had an air of sophistication, but something more, a quiet strength that seemed to radiate without trying. As she passed by, I tried not to stare, but my gaze naturally followed her. There was a subtle pull I couldn't quite explain. I had seen her around before, she was my neighbor's sister, though we had never actually exchanged words. She wasn't someone I knew well, but her reputation preceded her. Recently divorced, people said she was working on finding herself again. There was something mysterious about her, something that left a sense of yearning in the air whenever she was nearby. She caught me looking. For a moment, I froze. Her gaze met mine, and there was an intensity in her eyes that made it feel like the world had momentarily paused. I quickly looked away, my face warming with embarrassment, but before I could retreat entirely into the safety of my porch, she stopped in her tracks. Her lips curved into a playful smile, her eyes twinkling as she tilted her head slightly, assessing me in a way that made my heart skip. And then, in a voice that was soft yet confident, she spoke. "Are you sure you're old enough for this?" The words hung in the air for a second longer than I expected, carrying an underlying challenge, but also something else, something playful, inviting. My breath caught, and for a split second, I wondered if I had misheard her. Was she teasing? Testing? Or was there something deeper in her tone, an unspoken connection forming between us? She didn't wait for an answer. With a final wink, she turned and continued down the street, her steps graceful, as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet, I remained rooted to the spot, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. The sound of her heels clicking against the pavement echoed in my ears long after she disappeared from view. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. Was she serious? Was it just a harmless flirtation? Or was there something more in her gaze, an invitation, a spark of interest? The questions swirled in my head, but I had no answers. All I knew was that something had shifted in that brief moment, something I couldn't ignore. It was as if a door had creaked open, and I couldn't help but wonder what lay beyond it. But for now, all I could do was wait and see if our paths would cross again. Days passed, and the small town I had moved to continued its quiet, predictable pace. I had settled into my new routine, finding comfort in the gentle rhythm of neighborhood life. Yet, every time I went outside, there was a part of me that still felt like I was waiting for something to happen. I couldn't shake the memory of her playful wink, the teasing words she had whispered, and the way they had all left a mark on my mind. It wasn't long before I saw her again. It was late afternoon, the sun beginning its descent, casting a soft, warm glow over everything. I was out on my porch again, this time simply enjoying the moment. The air was a little cooler, a breeze rustling through the leaves of the trees lining the street. I leaned back in my chair, trying to unwind, but my thoughts kept drifting back to her, to that moment, to her smile, to the lingering questions that still hovered around her words. And then, there she was. She appeared at the edge of the street, her figure silhouetted by the fading light. This time, she wasn't walking past, she was standing in front of her own house, tending to a small garden by the front porch. I hadn't seen her in her element before, not like this. The image of her focused on the task at hand, her fingers carefully pruning the plants, seemed to strip away any remaining mystery. She wasn't just the woman with the enigmatic past and the bold confidence, she was grounded, immersed in something simple, something peaceful. I watched for a few moments, not sure what I was waiting for. But it felt as though the universe had decided to offer me another chance, a moment to bridge the gap between us. I thought about going inside, pretending I hadn't seen her, but there was a pull, something magnetic, that made me stay. And then, our eyes met. I didn't mean to stare, but there it was again, the spark. It felt like time slowed down for a brief instant, as if the world was momentarily holding its breath. Her gaze locked with mine, but there was something different this time. She didn't look away right away, didn't brush it off with the same playful smile. Instead, there was a soft curiosity in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place, but it was there. The moment lingered, too long, perhaps, before she broke the silence with a subtle smile, nodding at me as if acknowledging the tension that hung in the air between us. The gesture was small, but it felt significant. She wasn't just passing by anymore. This time, it felt like an invitation, an acknowledgement of something unspoken, something shared. I stood up from my chair, hesitating. It wasn't that I didn't want to approach her, I did. The magnetic pull was undeniable. But I also didn't want to seem too forward, too eager. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, unsure of the proper way to break the silence, when she did it for me. "Nice weather today," she called out, her voice gentle but steady, not forced. "Perfect for tending to the garden, don't you think?" Her words were simple, but they carried a warmth, a willingness to connect, to turn what had once been an accidental glance into something more. I nodded, offering a small smile in return. "Yeah, it's beautiful," I replied, my voice sounding more tentative than I wanted. "You've got a good eye for plants." Her lips curled into another smile, the kind that didn't just reflect politeness, but something deeper, a quiet appreciation, perhaps. She glanced at her garden and then back at me. "It's a small hobby of mine," she said. "Keeps me busy." The words were light, but I sensed there was something more behind them. Her voice softened as if she was letting me see a side of her that wasn't as guarded. I knew, even then, that there was a complexity to her, something beneath the surface that I was only just beginning to touch. I took a step forward, drawn into the moment, but before I could say anything else, she looked at me with a knowing smile and said, "Well, it was nice seeing you again. Take care." And just like that, the moment slipped away. She turned back to her garden, and I was left standing there, wondering if I had just missed my chance, or if the opportunity to get closer was still there, waiting for me to take it. Her departure wasn't abrupt, but it left me with a sense of longing, of something unfinished. I couldn't stop thinking about the brief connection we'd shared. It was small, a passing smile, a few words exchanged, but it felt significant, like a door had been left slightly ajar, inviting me to step through. The days passed in their usual quiet rhythm, but every time I ventured outside, there she was, a reminder of that brief, unexpected encounter. I'd catch glimpses of her, either in her garden, walking her dog, or simply sitting on her porch. There was something about her that made it impossible to ignore, and though our interactions had remained minimal, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I learned bits and pieces about her in the most indirect ways, casual conversations with my neighbor, the sound of her laughter carrying from across the street, the occasional shared glance when our paths would cross. My neighbor, who was always friendly but a little tight-lipped about personal matters, mentioned a few things about her, how she was starting fresh after her divorce, how she'd been through some tough times but was slowly rediscovering herself. She wasn't the type to wear her emotions on her sleeve, but there was a softness to her, an unspoken depth. I began to wonder what it would be like to truly understand her, to get past the guarded exterior that she wore so effortlessly. But there was hesitation on my part. What did a guy like me have to offer someone with her history? I was young, still figuring out my life. She, on the other hand, had lived through enough to shape her into someone stronger, more resilient. It felt like there was a gap between us, one I wasn't sure how to cross. The moments I spent observing her, however, were not uncomfortable. It was the opposite, actually. She seemed unaware of my watchful gaze, completely engrossed in whatever task she was doing, yet there was something magnetic about her every movement. I noticed how she would sometimes pause and look around, her eyes searching for something, her face soft with thought. At other times, her smile would flicker into existence as if she had just remembered something pleasant, a memory, perhaps. Those fleeting moments made me wonder if she had someone to share them with, or if she was as alone in those moments as I often felt. One afternoon, as I was sitting on my porch, I saw her again. This time, she was on the porch with a book in hand. The sun had begun to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I couldn't help but notice how she looked, bathed in that gentle light. She was reading, but her focus wasn't entirely on the pages. Her eyes occasionally lifted, gazing at the horizon, lost in thought. It was a quiet, peaceful image, one that stirred something inside me. I wanted to talk to her, to learn more about her, to find out what lay behind the calm exterior she wore so well. But even as I thought about it, I hesitated. There was a fear in me, a doubt that I wouldn't know how to bridge the space between us. We were from different worlds, different places in life. Still, my curiosity grew, and I found myself wondering more about her every time our paths crossed. Perhaps, I thought, there was more to her than the confident, self-assured woman who smiled at me. Maybe, beneath it all, there was a person who wanted to be seen, someone who had experienced heartache, yes, but someone who also had the potential for joy again. And perhaps, just maybe, I could be the one to see her. It was an overcast evening when fate pushed me past the boundaries of cautious observation. The sky had darkened with the promise of rain, and the air carried a coolness that hinted at the storm that was about to break. I had been out running errands, and as I returned home, the first few raindrops began to fall. Just as I was about to make a quick dash to my front door, I noticed her, standing on her porch, looking up at the sky as though she had no plans to come inside. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should offer her shelter or let her be, but the sight of her standing there, almost lost in her thoughts, tugged at something inside me. I couldn't ignore the pull to be closer. She hadn't noticed me yet, and I wondered if it would be too forward to approach her, especially with the weather turning. Before I could make up my mind, the rain came down harder. A heavy downpour drenched the street, and I saw her take a few steps toward the door, her movements slow, as if she were finally deciding to retreat indoors. But then, as if sensing my indecision, she looked over at me, eyes meeting mine with a soft smile. "Looks like we're both stuck with the weather," she said, her voice gentle but steady. The simple words cut through the tension that had been growing between us over the past few weeks. She wasn't avoiding me, she was acknowledging me. Before I could say anything, she added, "I don't mind the rain, but it's always nicer with company. You're welcome to join me if you like." I stood there for a second, caught off guard by her invitation. She was offering me an out, a way to break the distance we'd kept between us without it feeling forced. It was a subtle invitation, casual enough that it didn't feel like a big deal, but personal enough to leave me wondering if there was more to it. I didn't hesitate long. "Thank you," I said, my voice a little more tentative than I'd intended. I made my way across the street, my heart pounding, unsure if I was making the right choice, but unable to ignore the pull toward her. She led me inside, and I noticed immediately how her home was warm, cozy, a stark contrast to the rain outside. The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air, and soft lighting from a nearby lamp illuminated the space in a calming way. It felt like stepping into a sanctuary. "Tea or coffee?" she asked as I stepped into the living room, clearly trying to make me feel at ease. "Tea would be great," I replied, settling down onto the couch while she moved toward the kitchen. As I sat there, I watched her, taking in the way she moved, effortlessly, yet with purpose. It struck me how comfortable she seemed in her own space. And for a moment, I wondered if this calm, peaceful setting was a reflection of who she was when no one else was around. There was something about her that seemed so self-assured, but I could sense that beneath the surface, there was a depth, a quiet vulnerability, a past she wasn't yet ready to share. She returned with 2 steaming mugs, handing me one before sitting across from me. We both sipped in silence for a moment, letting the rains pattering outside fill the space between us. I could feel the tension from earlier in the week easing. Something in her manner, her unhurried movements, her soft smile, made me feel like I was being welcomed into a part of her life that not many had access to. Finally, she spoke. "I don't often have company over," she said, her voice almost a whisper, as though she hadn't planned to say it aloud. "It's not that I mind being alone. It's just that sometimes, it gets a little too quiet." The honesty in her words was striking, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something deeper. She wasn't just the confident woman I had observed from afar, she was real, vulnerable, and somehow even more captivating now that she was sharing a piece of herself with me. "I get that," I replied, my voice quieter now. "Sometimes, the silence feels heavier than it should." We both sat there, the storm outside a distant sound compared to the quiet connection that seemed to be growing between us. We had crossed a threshold, and there was no going back now. The distance that had once separated us felt smaller, as if we had both been waiting for the right moment to take the next step. This wasn't just a casual conversation anymore. It was a moment of shared honesty, an opening of doors. And with it, the weight of what was unspoken between us grew, and I couldn't help but wonder where it would lead. After our tea and the quiet moments shared in her cozy living room, something between us had shifted. There was no denying the connection we shared, but with it came a hesitation that neither of us could fully explain. As the days passed, our brief interactions continued, small gestures, lingering glances, moments that seemed to promise more, yet neither of us dared to cross that invisible line. I would see her often, sometimes from my porch, sometimes when I ran into her in the neighborhood, but now, there was a subtle understanding in the air. Each time we spoke, there was something unspoken lingering between us, a tension that wasn't overwhelming, but present, like the hum of an electric current under the surface. It felt natural to be near her, to talk to her, but there was always this quiet fear, an unacknowledged barrier that neither of us was willing to address. It was the little things that made the tension so palpable. The way her eyes would meet mine across the street, and for a moment, neither of us would speak. The fleeting smiles, the casual touches as we handed each other things, a bag of groceries, a shared umbrella in the rain. It was as if we were both walking a tightrope, unsure of whether to lean in or step back. One evening, I ran into her again while she was walking her dog. The neighborhood had grown quiet, the kind of silence that settled after the busyness of the day had passed. The streetlights cast soft shadows across the pavement, and the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn. She was walking slowly, as though savoring the cool evening, and when I saw her, I felt that familiar pull. "Evening," I said, as I approached, my voice betraying a hint of nervousness. "Evening," she replied, her tone warm, but with a subtle hesitance too. She stopped walking, allowing her dog to sniff at the grass beside the sidewalk, and we stood there, facing each other. I could feel the unspoken weight of our silence, and for the first time, I realized how much we were both holding back. She wasn't the type to make the first move, and I wasn't sure if I had the courage to push any further. My mind raced with the thought of what could be, but my heart warned me to tread carefully. She had been through a lot, and I wasn't sure if she was ready for something like this. Her past, her divorce, I could feel it in the way she held herself, in the careful way she navigated our conversations. She wasn't rushing, and neither was I. But as the seconds stretched into what felt like minutes, I found myself inching closer to her, the pull undeniable. And yet, just before I could say anything, just before the space between us could close completely, she shifted slightly, adjusting her posture, stepping back, and for a brief moment, we were both caught in the pause. "I should get going," she said, her voice softer now, almost hesitant. "It's getting late." I nodded, the unspoken tension between us hanging thick in the air. "Yeah, of course. It's a nice evening for a walk, though." She smiled, but it was a guarded smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, it is." As she turned and continued her walk, I stood there for a moment, watching her go, and I couldn't help but feel that the hesitation was a barrier, one that neither of us was ready to break, not yet. We were both holding back, unsure of what would happen if we let ourselves move forward. Maybe we were both afraid of what would come after that first step. Would the vulnerability be too much? Would the age gap, the difference in our lives, become a wall between us? The questions swirled in my mind, and I wondered if, like me, she was waiting for the other to make the first move. But tonight, like every other, we would both simply walk away, our connection lingering in the space between us, a dance of hesitation that neither of us could fully break free from. The days blurred together, each one carrying with it the same quiet tension, the same hesitant glances and fleeting smiles. The space between us had grown smaller, but the barrier remained, an invisible line neither of us was ready to cross. We lingered there, trapped in a quiet dance of near touching, of almost words, of everything unsaid hanging between us like a heavy fog. I couldn't help but wonder if this was the way it would always be, each passing moment pulling us closer, but neither of us brave enough to make the leap. It was late afternoon when I saw her again, this time standing in her front yard, staring up at the tree in her yard. The leaves had started to turn, their once green hue fading into autumn gold. The sight was serene, almost meditative, and it pulled me in without thought. She didn't seem to notice me at first. I stood there for a moment, my heart quickening as I debated whether I should say something, anything to bridge the distance between us. The wind picked up, sending a chill through the air, and that's when she finally noticed me standing by the fence. Her eyes met mine, and for the briefest second, I saw something flicker there, not the playful teasing or the guarded distance that had become the norm, but something deeper. A quiet invitation, an openness that felt as if she were ready to let something slip, to let me in. I took a step forward, my heart beating a little faster. The air around us felt charged, filled with the tension of everything we hadn't said to each other. She smiled, but it wasn't the guarded, polite smile I'd seen before. It was softer, warmer, as if she had let go of some of the hesitation that had kept us apart. "Hi," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. It felt like the words had been waiting for weeks to finally escape. "It's a beautiful evening, isn't it?" She nodded, her gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than usual. "Yes, it is. The air's cooler tonight." "I've been meaning to ask you something," I said, the words flowing before I could stop them. I didn't know what I was about to say, but it felt right. "How do you do it? Find the strength to keep going, I mean. You seem so put together." Her expression softened at the question, and for the first time, she didn't brush it off with a smile or a laugh. She simply exhaled, the weight of the question settling between us. "I don't know," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I guess you just do. You don't have a choice sometimes." The honesty in her voice made my chest tighten. She wasn't just the confident, aloof woman I had seen from afar. She was real, with her own struggles and fears. In that moment, I saw her vulnerability, the part of her that had always seemed hidden. And I realized then that it wasn't just her strength that had drawn me in, but her raw honesty, the way she let the walls come down when no one else was looking. Before I could say anything else, she took a small step forward, closing the gap between us. Without thinking, my hand moved to steady myself against the fence, but in the process, my fingers brushed against hers. It was a light touch, accidental, almost, but it felt electric. Her hand lingered for a fraction of a second, her skin soft against mine, and the moment stretched out longer than it should have. She didn't pull away immediately, and neither did I. It wasn't a grand gesture, but something about it felt like the first step towards something real, something that could break the tension that had held us both in place for so long. There was no hesitation in that brief touch, no fear of crossing some imaginary line. For the first time, it felt like we were both exactly where we were meant to be. She smiled again, this time with a softness that reached her eyes. "It's okay to be unsure sometimes," she said, her voice low, steady. And in that moment, I realized that the hesitation, the uncertainty, they didn't need to define us anymore. The connection between us had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged, to be explored. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time, I didn't need to have all the answers. All I knew was that the touch, as small as it was, felt like a promise, that we had both just crossed into something new, something we couldn't undo. The weeks that followed were quieter, but the tension between us had finally dissolved into something more natural, more comfortable. What had once felt like a game of tug-of-war, a slow dance of hesitation, now seemed like a steady rhythm, a mutual understanding that neither of us had to force. It wasn't a dramatic shift, no grand gesture, it was simply the culmination of the moments we'd shared, the gentle touches, the quiet conversations, the way we had both learned to navigate the space between us. I saw her more frequently now, and each time felt less like an accident and more like a choice. We spoke without the unease we had once carried, exchanging stories, thoughts, and small pieces of ourselves that we had kept hidden for so long. There was an unspoken ease when we were together, no pressure, no expectation, just the comfort of someone who was slowly becoming an integral part of my life. It wasn't just the shared looks or the lingering touches anymore. There was an unspoken promise in the way she looked at me, a sense that whatever had started between us wasn't just a fleeting attraction. We were both in this, fully present, fully aware of the quiet journey we were on together. She was no longer just my neighbor's sister, she was someone who had become part of my world in a way I never expected. And it felt right, even if the beginning of it had been nothing like I had imagined. One evening, after another quiet dinner together, we found ourselves sitting on her porch, the evening air cool against our skin. The stars were scattered across the sky, and the faintest breeze stirred the leaves in the trees. It was the kind of night where everything seemed to slow down, the world becoming quieter as if everything around us had faded, leaving just the two of us. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, her voice soft as she leaned back in her chair, "how things turn out the way they do? How some people come into your life at the right moment, and others don't?" I looked at her, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature around us. Her eyes were open, vulnerable, yet there was a strength in them that I had come to admire. "I do," I said, my voice quieter than usual. "And I think sometimes, we meet people when we need them most, even when we don't realize it at first." She smiled, and there was something different about it this time, less guarded, more genuine. She reached over and gently brushed a lock of hair from my face, her fingers brushing against my skin in the softest of touches. It wasn't a touch meant to spark anything physical, but one that conveyed the quiet depth of everything we had shared. It was a touch that felt like a promise, not of love, not yet, but of something that had the potential to grow, to bloom into something real. "I'm glad I met you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I needed this more than I realized." Her words settled into my chest, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe it. This wasn't just a fleeting connection, a momentary spark. This was the beginning of something that could be more, something that felt grounded in trust, understanding, and the quiet knowledge that we had both found something we were ready for. I leaned forward, taking her hand in mine. The touch was simple, unhurried, and yet it felt like the most honest thing I had ever done. "Me too," I said, my voice steady, my heart finally at ease. And just like that, in the quiet of the evening, we knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. There were no more questions, no more hesitation. There was only the understanding that we had found something special, and that it was only just beginning.